Hey everyone, and welcome back to Chat Like a Native. I bet you guys know that feeling when you're listening to native English speakers and it's like they just speed up like they're speaking a mile a minute.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It can be so frustrating, right? To feel like you're missing out on the entire conversation.
Absolutely.
So today we're going to take a deep dive into helping you decode fast English. We'll unpack the reasons why it sounds so different, give you some practical strategies to help you keep up, and share some fun ways to train your ears.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
So if you're ready to unlock a whole new level of understanding, grab your headphones and let's dive in.
You know, it's funny because fast English isn't really about speaking faster. It's more about how the sounds change when words are all strung together.
Right. It's not like just knowing more vocabulary.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the rhythm and the flow of natural speech.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you first learned to read, you know.
Yeah.
You started with individual letters and you blended them into sounds, and then finally you're reading whole sentences smoothly.
Exactly. And just like learning to read, there are techniques we can use to make sense of those rapid-fire conversations. One thing I find really helpful is focusing on the gist, like the main idea of what's being said.
Okay.
The gist. Don't get bogged down trying to catch every single word. Just listen for keywords. Pay attention to the speaker's tone and body language and try to visualize what they're describing.
That's such a good point. It's like solving a puzzle. You don't need all the pieces to see the overall picture.
Right.
But what about when you encounter words or phrases that you've never heard before? I know I tend to panic, and then I totally lose track of what's going on.
I hear ya. It's a
Wow.
common struggle. But remember, even native speakers don't understand every single word they hear.
Oh, that's good to know.
They rely on context and their knowledge of the language to fill in the gaps. So try to relax and trust your instincts. If you miss a word or two, don't sweat it. Focus on what you do understand and just keep listening.
So it's more about developing that intuition for the language rather than striving for perfect comprehension every single time.
Exactly. And another technique that can really help is segmenting, basically breaking down fast speech into smaller, more manageable chunks.
So kind of like hitting the pause button in your mind, rewind, and then process smaller bits of information at a time.
Yes, it's like learning a dance routine. You wouldn't try to learn the whole thing at once, would you?
Oh, no.
You'd bring it down into steps, practice each one individually, and then gradually put it all together.
That's a great analogy. And I imagine this becomes even more important when you're dealing with longer sentences or, more complex ideas.
Absolutely. Segmenting helps you slow down the information flow and process it more effectively. It's especially useful for tackling those long, winding sentences that native speakers just love to use.
Okay, so we've talked about listening for the gist and segmenting. Any other strategies we can add to our decoding toolkit?
Well, remember how we talked about how fast English is all about how sounds change? That's where understanding connected speech comes in.
You mean like how words kind of blend together, like want to becoming wanna?
Exactly. Or going to, morphing into gonna. These are called contractions, and they're incredibly common in everyday speech. Learning to recognize these patterns is like discovering a secret code to unlock fast English.
It's like our ears need to play catch up with how the sounds actually work in natural conversation.
Right, and it goes beyond just contractions. Sometimes sounds within words even disappear or get replaced.
Oh, really?
Think about comfortable. It's a mouthful, right? So native speakers often shorten it to comftable, dropping that or sound altogether.
Wow, I never really noticed that before. It's like a whole secret language within the language.
It is. And the more you pay attention to these patterns, the easier it will be to decode fast speech. It's like learning the rules of a game. Once you know the rules, you can play more effectively.
So it's not just about learning individual words, it's about understanding how those words interact and transform in spoken English.
Precisely. And that's where the real fun begins. Because once you start recognizing these patterns, it's like a whole new world of understanding opens up.
It's like cracking the code to fluency. But I know it can feel overwhelming to know where to start. What are some practical ways to build that solid foundation before we dive into the fast-paced world?
Well, think about those early reading lessons again. You started with simple stories and gradually worked your way up to more challenging texts. It's the same with listening.
Okay.
So start with materials designed for English learners, where the pace is slower and the vocabulary is more manageable.
So think podcasts specifically made for learners, news broadcasts with clear pronunciation, or even audiobooks with transcripts you can follow along with.
Exactly.
I remember when I was learning Spanish, I used to watch children's cartoons.
Oh, nice.
The simple language and exaggerated pronunciation were perfect for training my ear.
That's a perfect example. And don't underestimate the power of repetition. Listening to the same material multiple times can be incredibly helpful. It allows your brain to really absorb those sounds and patterns, even if you don't understand everything on the first listen.
It's like training your ear to become more attuned to the nuances of the language.
Yeah.
But what about actually practicing these techniques? Listening is one thing, but how do we actively improve our comprehension?
That's where shadowing comes in. It's a technique where you listen to a recording and try to imitate the speaker as closely as possible, mimicking their pronunciation rhythm and intonation.
Oh, I've heard of that. But I always thought it was more for pronunciation practice.
It definitely helps with pronunciation, but it's also incredibly effective for improving listening comprehension. Think about it. When you're shadowing, you're forcing your brain to process the language at a much deeper level. You're not just passively listening, you're actively engaging with the sounds and trying to reproduce them.
So it's like a workout for your ears and your brain.
Exactly. And the more you practice shadowing, the more your brain becomes attuned to the patterns of fast English. It's like training a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
This is all making so much sense. So we've got a solid foundation with slower materials, we're practicing shadowing, and we're armed with strategies like listening for the gist, segmenting, and paying attention to connected speech. What else can we do to level up our listening skills?
Well, let's not forget about all the amazing resources that are available at our fingertips. Think podcasts on all sorts of topics, short video clips, even interactive exercises like online quizzes or dictation practice.
It's becoming a whole language lab in our pockets.
Yeah.
But with so many options, it can be overwhelming to know where to start. Any recommendations for our listeners?
Absolutely. Look for resources that align with your interests and learning style. If you love movies, try watching short clips with subtitles. If you're a podcast junkie, find shows with transcripts available. The key is to make it enjoyable so you'll stick with it.
That's such an important point. Learning should be fun, not a chore.
Exactly. And remember, even just a few minutes of focused listening practice each day can make a huge difference.
Consistency is key, right?
Absolutely. It's like building any skill. Regular practice is what helps you make progress and see results. You know, as we've been talking about all these strategies for understanding fast English, I keep thinking about how much our brains are like muscles.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, just like any muscle, our brains need regular exercise to get stronger. And that's especially true when it comes to listening comprehension. The more we expose ourselves to fast English, the more we're essentially working out our listening muscles.
So it's like we're training our brains to process information more quickly and efficiently. And just like with physical exercise, consistency is key.
Exactly. It's all about building that foundation and making listening practice a regular habit. But I think it's also important to find ways to make it enjoyable, so you'll actually stick with it.
That's such a good point, because if it feels like a chore, you're less likely to make it a regular part of your routine. So what are some fun ways to integrate listening practice into our lives? I know I personally love watching movies and TV shows in English with subtitles.
That's a fantastic way to do it. It's like sneaking in some learning while you're being entertained. You get exposed to natural dialogue idioms and slang, all in a fun and engaging way. Plus, you can always pause and rewind if you need to catch something.
You know what else I've found helpful? Listening to music in English. It's a great way to immerse yourself in the sounds and rhythms of the language. Plus, it's just plain enjoyable.
Absolutely. Music is a powerful tool for language learning. And here's a bonus tip. Try reading the lyrics while you listen. It's another great way to connect those spoken sounds with the written words.
Okay, I'm adding that to my list. These are all such practical and accessible tips. It really feels like anyone can incorporate them into their routine. But let's be real for a moment. One of the biggest challenges for me has always been dealing with different accents. I remember traveling to Scotland once, and I could barely understand a word anyone was saying.
It's true. Even among native English speakers, there's such a wide variety of accents that can make it difficult to understand, even for people who are fluent.
So how do we tackle this accent hurdle? Is it just a matter of exposure, like we talked about with listening practice?
Exposure is definitely key. The more you listen to different accents, the more your ear will become attuned to the subtle differences in pronunciation and intonation. It's like training your ear to recognize those patterns even if you don't understand every single word.
I guess it's kind of like learning to identify different types of birds. At first, they all just sound like chirping, but the more you listen, the more you start to notice the distinct calls and songs of each species.
That's a great analogy. And just like with bird watching, there are some specific things you can do to make that accent training even more effective. For example, try seeking out content from different regions. Don't just stick to American or British English. Branch out and explore accents from Australia, Canada, South Africa, India. The list goes on.
It's like taking your ears on a global adventure.
Exactly. And while you're listening, pay attention to the unique features of each accent. How do they pronounce certain vowels or consonants? Where do they place the stress in words? It's like becoming an accent detective.
I love this approach. It's so much more engaging than just passively listening. It's like you're actively decoding the language. But what about when you're in a real-time conversation and you encounter an accent you're not familiar with? I know I sometimes feel embarrassed to ask someone to repeat themselves.
I totally understand that feeling. But honestly, most native speakers are more than happy to slow down or rephrase if they know you're learning English. It's all part of the communication process, and it shows that you're genuinely interested in understanding them and their culture, which is always a good thing.
That's a good point. It's a reminder that communication is a two-way street, and it's okay to ask for clarification when you need it. So to sum up our discussion on accents, the key is to embrace the diversity of English pronunciation. Seek out different accents, analyze their unique features, and don't be shy about asking for clarification. The more you expose yourself to these variations, the more confident you'll become in understanding fast English no matter where it comes from.
Exactly. And you know what? I think this ties in perfectly with something we touched on earlier, the importance of stepping outside the classroom and experiencing English in the real world. It's one thing to learn about accents in a textbook or online, but it's a whole different ballgame when you're actually interacting with people from different backgrounds and hearing those accents firsthand.
Absolutely. While structured learning is important, real-life interactions are where the magic happens. It's where you'll encounter those unexpected accents, the slang, the humor, the cultural references that make the language come alive. It's like the difference between reading about how to ride a bike and actually getting on one and pedaling.
Precisely. You can study all the theory you want, but until you get out there and experience it firsthand, you'll never truly master the skill.
So what are some specific ways our listeners can immerse themselves in real-life English? I know we've already mentioned a few, like attending local events or following English speakers on social media. But are there any other ideas you can share?
Sure. How about joining a language exchange group? It's a great way to meet people from all over the world who are also learning English. You can practice speaking with native speakers in a casual, supportive environment.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea. I've heard about those.
Yeah.
But I always thought they were more for advanced learners. It's encouraging to know that they can be beneficial for intermediate learners as well.
Absolutely. Everyone is welcome and you can learn so much from each other. Or how about volunteering for an organization that uses English?
That's brilliant. Not only would you be helping a good cause, but you'd also be getting valuable listening and speaking practice in a real-world setting. And it's a chance to connect with people who share your interests, which can make the whole experience even more enjoyable.
Exactly. And don't forget about travel. If you have the opportunity, visiting an English-speaking country is one of the best ways to fully immerse yourself in the language and culture.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. Traveling opens up a whole new world of language learning opportunities. You're constantly surrounded by English in shops, restaurants, on the street. It's like a 247 language immersion program.
Exactly. And it's not just about the language itself. It's about experiencing the culture, the people, the way of life in an English-speaking environment.
It's about connecting with the heart of the language, not just the words on the page.
Beautifully said. So, if you have the chance to travel even for a short trip, seize the opportunity. It can be a truly transformative experience for your language learning journey. But of course, we recognize that not everyone has the opportunity to travel or join a language exchange group. So what are some tips for creating that immersion environment at home?
That's a great question. I'm sure many of our listeners are wondering the same thing. What are some creative ways to bring English into our daily lives, even if we can't physically travel to an English-speaking country?
Well, one simple thing you can do is switch your phone and computer settings to English.
That's a good idea. But wouldn't it be confusing at first? How did you overcome that when you first tried it?
You're right, it can be a bit disorienting at first. But I found that after a few days I got used to it, and it actually became quite helpful. It's like having little reminders throughout the day to think in English. You're constantly interacting with the language, even if it's just reading menus or navigating websites.
And it helps you familiarize yourself with everyday vocabulary and phrases that you might not encounter in a textbook.
Precisely. And speaking of everyday vocabulary, what about listening to English podcasts or radio stations while you're cooking, cleaning, or working out?
Oh, that's a classic multitasking move.
Yeah.
Turning those otherwise mundane chores into listening practice. I love finding new podcasts to listen to while I'm doing housework. It makes the time fly by.
Exactly. And the beauty of podcasts is that there's something for everyone. No matter what your interests are, you're bound to find a podcast that you'll enjoy. And that enjoyment factor is key, right? If you're genuinely interested in the content, you're more likely to stay engaged and actually absorb the language.
Absolutely.
hmm
It's so much easier to learn when you're having fun. And don't forget about audiobooks. They're another fantastic way to immerse yourself in English. I personally love listening to audiobooks while I'm going for a walk or doing yoga. It's like having a personal narrator guiding you through a story.
And you can choose books that match your level and interests. So whether you're into mysteries, romances, or self-help books, there's an audiobook out there waiting to be discovered.
I actually never thought of that about that.
Mm.
I tend to gravitate towards podcasts and music, but I'm going to have to check out some audiobooks now. It sounds like a really enjoyable way to practice listening. So to recap, switching your phone settings, listening to podcasts, audiobooks, it really feels like there are endless possibilities for creating that English-speaking environment at home.
There are. And the best part is you can customize it to fit your own interests and lifestyle. It's not about following a rigid set of rules. It's about finding what works best for you and incorporating it into your daily routine.
This has been such an inspiring conversation. We've covered so much ground, from practical listening strategies to creating an immersive environment, and even the importance of embracing different accents.
And through it all, we've emphasized the importance of consistent practice, finding enjoyment in the process, and being patient with yourself.
Those are such crucial takeaways. And I'm excited to delve into one final aspect of understanding fast English that's often overlooked.
Me too. It's something that can make a huge difference in your language learning journey.
So we've covered a ton of practical tips and strategies for decoding fast English, but there's one more crucial element we need to talk about. That's mindset.
Oh, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. It's all about having the right attitude and mental approach. Because let's face it, learning a language, especially tackling the challenge of understanding fast speech, can be tough. There will be times when you feel frustrated, discouraged, and maybe even tempted to give up.
Yeah, I think everyone who's ever learned a language has been there. It's so easy to get bogged down by those moments of doubt.
It is. And that's precisely why cultivating a positive and resilient mindset is so important. It's like having a secret weapon in your language learning arsenal. Because when you believe in yourself and your ability to learn, you're much more likely to persevere through those challenges.
So how do we actually develop that unshakable mindset? Any practical tips for staying motivated and bouncing back from setbacks?
Absolutely. One of the most effective strategies is setting realistic goals. Don't expect to become fluent overnight or understand every single word of a rapid-fire conversation right away. Remember, language learning is a marathon, not a sprint.
That's such a good reminder. It's about making steady progress over time, not about striving for perfection right from the start.
Exactly. And every step you take, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction. So celebrate those small wins. Did you finally understand a phrase you've been struggling with? High five. Did you manage to follow along with a podcast episode without getting completely lost? That's amazing progress.
Yeah.
Focus on those positive moments and acknowledge how far you've come. It's like giving yourself a little pat on the back for all your hard work.
You know what else I find helpful? Shifting my focus from what I don't understand to what I do understand. It's so easy to get fixated on those words or phrases that fly right over our heads. But when I remind myself of all the progress I've made and all the things I can understand, it gives me a boost of confidence.
That's a fantastic strategy. It's all about reframing your perspective and focusing on the positive aspects of language learning. And speaking of positivity, remember those incredible benefits we talked about earlier. Being able to connect with people from all over the world, access a wealth of information and entertainment, and even open up new career opportunities.
Oh yeah, those are some pretty awesome perks. It's easy to forget about them when you're struggling with grammar rules or feeling lost in a fast conversation. But keeping those long-term goals in mind can be incredibly motivating.
It's like reminding yourself of the amazing destination you're heading towards. And even if the journey gets bumpy from time to time, it'll be worth it in the end.
But what about those inevitable moments when we make mistakes? I know I used to get so flustered and feel like I was failing whenever I mispronounced a word or couldn't understand something. Any advice for dealing with those feelings of self-doubt?
You know what? Mistakes are not failures. They're opportunities to learn and grow. Think of them as stepping stones on your path to fluency. Every mistake you make is a chance to identify an area where you can improve. So embrace those mistakes, learn from them, and keep moving forward.
I love that perspective. It's like giving ourselves permission to be imperfect and seeing those slip-ups as valuable learning experiences. Because in reality, no one learns a language perfectly from the start. It's a process of trial and error, and that's okay.
Exactly. And you know what can make that process even more enjoyable and rewarding? Surrounding yourself with supportive people.
Like finding a language partner, joining a study group,
Yeah,
or connecting with other learners online.
absolutely. It's amazing how much a supportive community can boost your motivation and confidence. It's like having a cheerleading squad for your language learning journey. You can share tips, celebrate each other's successes, and offer encouragement when things get tough.
I love that analogy because learning a language doesn't have to be a solitary endeavor. It can be a fun and collaborative experience.
Precisely. So remember, mindset is everything. Set realistic goals, focus on the positive, embrace mistakes, and surround yourself with support. With the right attitude, you can achieve anything.
This has been such an inspiring conversation. We've covered so much ground from practical listening strategies to the power of immersion and the importance of cultivating a positive mindset. And I feel like we've equipped our listeners with a comprehensive toolkit for tackling the challenge of understanding fast English.
We have. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, but with consistent effort and the right attitude, you can unlock a whole new level of understanding and truly start chatting like a native.
And on that note, we want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into decoding fast English. We hope you found it helpful and inspiring. Until next time, keep practicing, keep learning, and keep those listening muscles strong.